Welcome to our panel on new initiatives to advance inclusive finance and financial services. With me today, well, first of all, I'm Gavin. I am the CEO and co-founder of Digital Frontiers. And with me today, we have Hélène Smertnik from Caribou. Hélène works primarily on things bracketed into platform livelihoods and with a specific research focus on social commerce. And within that, looking at the lenses of social commerce, gender, disabilities, and social agricultures. Welcome, Hélène. We also have our very well-known Amolo and Gavin coming to us from Nairobi, who is the CEO of Bankable Frontiers Associations, who in this space actually needs no introduction, have been around for a very, very long time. And we share a co-founder, right? So we share a founder, David. So welcome, Amolo.
Thank you.
Just framing today's conversation. So today's conversation is really looking at the fact that financial inclusion has been around as a topic for probably 2 decades now, at least. And we've looked for innovations in the inclusive finance space. But now, 2 decades on, we have a lot of the technical solutions, a lot of the business models, and a lot of understanding of the lives of the poor. And I think increasingly we're getting to the point where finance is embedded into the lives of the poor, regardless of those personal, whether they're personal needs, business needs, or anything else. So today's discussion is really to look at what's new, right? Instead of looking at what we've done and where we've come from, what's new? You know, how is inclusive finance evolving as a topic? How is finance evolving as a topic in the development world? And perhaps how it's broadened, you know, being embedded finance embedded into the lives of the poor. What are the other things that are embedded in the lives of the poor? We were due to have Robert with us. Robert sent his apologies, but just so that the audience knows, Africa Nendo, which Robert is the CEO of, is focused on accelerating inclusive and instant payment systems across the continent. So please do go and look at their website to get a better sense of what they're doing. Hélène, maybe I can start with you. Tell us a little bit about what is this thing called platform livelihoods, and specifically, what are you referring to as social commerce?
Sure, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. So platform livelihoods. So Caribou Digital is an advocacy and research consultancy that some may know. And currently we've been exploring, for the last few years, we've been exploring the concept of platform livelihoods, which is effectively the way workers, women and men, are earning a living on platforms. And those platforms both encompass digital platforms as well as social media. And given that we have short time, I'll focus on one of our current and very much ongoing research. So we do, full disclosure, have perhaps more questions than answers. And in fact, it's a great time to discuss those and hear questions from yourselves and from the audience. This study is focusing on social agriculture. We are also doing work on gender and people with disabilities, young people with disabilities, but I'll focus right now on social agriculture. So by social agriculture, we understand farmers that are leveraging social media channels for their agricultural livelihoods. It is an exploratory research, and at this point, what we wanted to do was just understand how big this was and what farmers do on social media. So I'll give a few early findings. We pretty much are 1/3 of the way in the research. So yeah, as I said, please would be delighted to hear questions to go further. But in terms of just a brief thing of what we've understood of social agriculture, the first thing we wanted to know whether it was a big thing or not. And perhaps no surprise to you and the audience is it is a big thing. It turns out that our estimates, and I won't go into the methodology, but it's pretty sturdy. We've identified globally around 9 million people, 9 million farmers use social media And there are three main ways they use social media. In no particular order, they transact using and leveraging social media platforms. They share information and knowledge among themselves, and they also support each other. To go perhaps more specifically in the transaction part, we didn't know starting off how big it was, the proportions of transactions that were happening with the help of social media. It turns out that it is the smaller part. So we've surveyed 300 farmers, and 6% of those, both men and women, 50-50 in terms of respondents, do transact on social media. It turns out that actually what they do most, as maybe no surprise, is share information and support each other. By knowing what kind of produce they should be selling or cultivating at a given time. However, we are exploring further, now that we finished our quantitative part, we are exploring further the experiences of transacting and to get into a more qualitative understanding of how these types of transactions happen and the experiences of farmers. Perhaps the other thing that may be of interest, speaking about new services and offerings, what we're seeing and what we want to explore further is how digital platforms can start integrating the social media behaviors of farmers. So instead of creating new financial services for farmers, instead surveying what farmers are organically doing on social media and integrating that in their models. So far, we've only seen perhaps one example of this, and that is in China. China is perhaps the country where social agriculture is the strongest and the most broadly spread. In China, there's a technology platform that's called Pinduoduo, which you may be familiar with. And they effectively connect farmers and consumers. And what they've developed is what they call a community group buying model, whereby consumers can, within the app, team up and bulk buy from farmers. And this, as you can imagine, is a win-win situation for both the consumers who get it at a cheaper price and for the farmer who can be more efficient in the delivery of products. So this is in China. And one of the reasons why Pinduoduo was able to be so successful in this group buying model and service is because of a very strong logistic channel and a strong payment system as well. So one question we have at this point in our research is understanding whether this is replicable in other markets. So it is very much a question. We at this point don't have any final recommendations, given that we're so early in the research. We are cautious of social media potentially remodeling the agricultural space in various ways. We are also very, I know we're speaking about new initiatives, but something that probably we always feel strongly about, and I can't help but speak about, is the old barriers of trust and social cultural norms, in particular for women who are farmers and who still face these persistent and old barriers. So even with new services, those elements come up, including in social media. So women farmers get more bullied. They have more distrust and often are more targeted in terms of misinformation. So those are things that we have to keep in mind as we're doing this research. So I'll leave it at that. I'm more than happy to speak further on our gender research as well. But yeah, I'll hand over to Amolo.
Amolo, expanding on that, or maybe just adding to, so beyond that, because I have many questions and I'm sure you do for Hélène. Beyond that, what are you seeing? What is BFA seeing as the new frontiers of inclusive finance, new initiatives?
So I think I'll pick up on the theme of social commerce first, which is that we have projects in a number of African countries and in India trying to help micro enterprises use digital commerce. And I think what we're really seeing is there's social commerce is the main way in which the customers, domestic customers in developing countries, it's the main way in which they find out what the market can offer. And so we see that even if you are selling through e-commerce platform or Amazon or Flipkart in India, Jumia in Africa, if you expect to actually have any sales, then you really need to work your social commerce efforts, and you need to interact with people in a much more human and natural way than the kind of algorithmic or chatbot approach that makes sense for large e-commerce providers. So I think what's been kind of exciting about all of that work is the growth of the domestic markets in most countries, and the pandemic has really pushed that forward. And some of those barriers that Hélène mentioned around payments and trust and logistics, there's been a bigger incentive to solve them. So we are seeing good opportunities for small entrepreneurs, and we're working with women entrepreneurs in Kenya and women handicraft groups in India, and it's been exciting to see the market response from domestic customers. I think one of the most interesting things for me is that to a large extent that market is a market of it's slightly hesitating to call it manufacturers, but at least artisanry, that it's there's a large domestic market for things that are produced domestically. And I think that's been quite gratifying to see that growing, and to see that the women that we work with growing their markets and opportunities. I guess we would only expect that to continue growing. And I think Hélène has alluded a bit to we're all on a roller coaster where somebody else has the controls, and we don't really know what the whole future of social commerce or even our digital lives is really going to contain, and where some of the pitfalls, identified pitfalls, lie. So I think it's going to be exciting and interesting as that market continues to grow, and there will definitely be benefits for smaller and low-income producers, but at the same time dangers that we all have to keep an eye out for, some of which are at this moment unknown. I guess just to add another feature that has become of our current world, that's become a lot more visible and present, is of course the climate crisis. And I think that we ourselves at BFA Global, but also the development community, obviously are going to be paying a lot more attention to where financial tools can actually help people recover from, avoid, prepare, and manage climate-related long-term and short-term issues. So I think we're going to see the sort of entire spectrum of the SDGs and the ways in which finance can be used or embedded, really starting to find the best ways to work against the climate crisis. And again, it's early days, so we may not, I mean, we certainly don't yet know what all the best ways are, but that's going to be a big challenge of the next few years.
Great, thank you, Amolo. A question for our audience, which has actually come up quite often. What do we mean by climate financing?
So it's a good question, and I think in Western countries, it's often has to do with mitigating, investing in electric generation instead of coal. But in our countries, mostly it has to do with climate adaptation. So low-income people, and especially farmers and fishers, but essentially anyone who lives closely dependent to natural resources, they're going to be experiencing more short-term shocks like floods and droughts, and more long-term climatic changes. And so partially, whatever their strategies are, their finance is always a part of that. If your strategy is to migrate, you need money to do that. If your strategy is to invest in better drought-resistant agriculture, you need money. or financial organization to do that, and especially insurance, which is very low prevalence in most developing countries. That's a financial product which is directly organized against for handling shocks. And so that's where I'm saying I think we are not fully, we don't fully know what the full range of things that finance will be helpful for, but some are already clear and identified.
Right, right. Hélène and Amolo, going back to this social commerce, and something that Chris Locke said to me recently helped the penny drop for me in terms of what we're talking about there, is that when Facebook went down, it's not only people's ability to load selfies that went down for 6 hours, it was the people's ability to actually earn a livelihood. And that was a real aha moment for me. And it led me to think about the proliferation, which I think is good, of these kind of social commerce or these kind of platforms that get used. But also, like you're mentioning, what are some of the risks around, maybe the concentration risk around a big platform like Facebook is my one question. And then my other is, looking at what we saw happen in China. It wasn't instant. This was a decade journey. But what they really got right was the ability at the point of onboarding someone that's not familiar with these social commerce platforms to give them the level of training that they need, the connections to network, the connections to markets and all of that. So, what was astonishing there is you saw, hundreds of millions of people over a decade being lifted out of poverty because of partly the training and connecting through social commerce. So my question for you there is, how far are we in the rest of the world from that, and what is the big barrier? So 2 questions: concentration risk. Is there only one platform for Africa, right, that this can really happen on? And then the other questions: how far are we in the outside, maybe India and Africa, in terms of getting to that level of scale?
I'll start with the second. I think we're in the early but quickly rising part of that 10-year journey. There are some aspects, and you mentioned the Chinese government investments that other countries that are not connected with finance or as such, but the road that is actually going to deliver your goods to market, and the regulation that allows you to produce whatever your product is at home, and the whole physical and legal infrastructure. I think it's, again, at fairly low but improving level. In Africa, obviously, we have the problem of 47 different countries and not set up for intercontinental trade, even when you have large concentrations of population, such as in East Africa. So, but again, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that is coming on stream. So I think we're still in the early part, and the speed at which they did it in China and the end results are their objectives. They're not assured, and there's a lot of action by many different actors that would enable it. But of course, the fact that they've trod that road already gives us all optimism that we can accomplish it as well. I think I'll see if Hélène wants to add anything on that.
Yeah, training is definitely training and upskilling, which is a word we use at Caribou Digital, is definitely I think, as Amolo says, part way there. We've been looking at what platforms are doing with regards to training in mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in South and Southeast Asia. And I would agree that there is still some way to go. So in our work, we've spent quite a bit of time within the MasterCard Foundation partnership we have, looking at skilling and what was needed. And I have to say, we've departed a bit from focusing on that as of now in terms of our research. But we're obviously seeing that there's still a very strong need for this. And it is almost as, you know, social commerce is the beginning of the journey for workers. Oftentimes what happens is they go from social commerce to e-commerce platforms. There's sort of a journey to formalization. And then perhaps from e-commerce platforms to having their own domain website and their own, you know, micro business, and, you know, standing on their own without even having to deal with e-commerce platforms. They don't necessarily go to that. But what turns out is in that journey, effectively, there is a divide that happens. A lot of people stay within the social commerce platform because they don't have the skills to, let's say, upgrade and formalize, and they may not have the literacy skills or the digital literacy skills. But also, back to our cultural social norms, in particular for women, they're not able to move forward in that journey, and that's still something we're exploring. So it still feels like the social commerce is a great first step, but certainly to be able to evolve and formalize training and skill is very much still a thing. And I don't have an answer as to what's the role of platforms and what are the roles of governments. It doesn't seem like some platforms, you know, we have a few examples. I have in mind one in particular that actually doesn't exist anymore, Link in Kenya, that was doing training of their carpenters, notably. But that it doesn't seem like the platforms are necessarily taking on that role. And the reason why they're not is at this point, I guess, based on costs, but certainly more to understand. And I don't think all the responsibility lies with platforms, of course, but certainly there is a need. And I think perhaps there will be a difference between the local platforms and the global platforms and what each of them decide to do. And perhaps the local platforms have more potential to kind of take on that responsibility. And perhaps just to link into your first question on Facebook. So definitely the power outage, I didn't mention it, but Facebook is critical in Kenya. So I don't know if I've actually mentioned this, but the social agriculture research is based in Kenya. So the 300 farmers we were interviewing are all based in Kenya. And just to give a sense of the impact of the Facebook outage, 84% of the 300 farmers we interviewed had been negatively impacted by the Facebook outage, even though it was in the later hours of the day in Kenya. Some lost income, some had general disruption to their operations, you know, their business operations. But certainly Facebook, there is definitely a firm risk there of them becoming the only platform. And that's something we're cautious of, in particular, as you know, to speak specifically about the agricultural space. It seems almost as Facebook could, as I was saying earlier, remodel agriculture by making farmers have to focus on algorithms to be able to do their business instead of spending time on their land. So there's certainly a strong caution, and this is something we want to highlight in our research. We don't have the answer to how to counter that, but it is definitely a risk that we see.
Yeah. They're taking my lead. Thanks, Hélène. Taking my lead from both of your responses and from the forums, the questions in the forums. In the 10 minutes that we have. So a bit of a data dump here in terms of questions, but you know, fascinating things. So we to what degree, I mean, if Robert was in the room, we'd say to him, to what degree are inclusive payment systems really enabling this, or the lack of inclusive payment systems across the continent disabling this, right? So we've come a long way on the continent, but you know, is there a gap? Linked to that, what about inclusive access? So to what degree are the poor, whether they're farmers or beyond, you know, in the other sectors in social commerce, to what degree is inclusive access to data, or, and by data I mean access to the web via the phone, still limiting? I know that's an old buzzword question, but is it still the case? And then, you know, a fascinating lens here. Telcos, you know, in absence of the financial sector innovating 15, 20 years ago, another sector innovated in mobile money and in inclusive finance. Is there an opportunity here for telcos to take the lead, either with an initial walled garden approach to these from a competitive angle, or to at least be an enabler? I suppose the latter part is an obvious one, but is there an opportunity for a telco-led strategy like we saw in mobile money? And then what is the role of government? So if I bundle all of that together is by saying, how is the ecosystem enabling and what's missing?
I'll give a bundled answer, which is the trust aspect. I think the payments work, pretty well in quite a number of countries now, but still, if you want to use to sell something at a distance, a physical item, we find that e-commerce services mostly do cash on demand, and that's not because cash is the issue. It's because people want to actually see, did I get the product that I expected? They want to see it first before paying, and then at that point they would either pay with mobile money, or it's a directly present right in front of you. So I feel like an answer to all the parts of your question is all those entities to work together to improve the trust infrastructure, which starts with but doesn't end with digital ID, and needs to be to cross different countries, can't be just local. Right.
I like that. So we start seeing, trust infrastructure. I actually like that because it does actually bundle it all together, right? So whether it's if we say that the telcos can pursue a telco-led individual strategy, well, not without a digital ID, or not without other other elements in it. I think looking at the time, 3 minutes, Hélène, I want to also honor Simon's question. He was looking for the profile of the farmer in your research.
Right. No, it's a great question. So there's it goes from agronomists to the farmer to and within farmer there's different type of farmers, but mostly smallholder farmers. There is quite an extensive list, and I would be more than happy to share that, but it's quite broad. Also are individuals that are doing farmers, but there are some that are more weather specific, more that do different types of crops, and so there's quite a range within the 300 farmers that we've been able to have participate in the research. But yeah,
thank you.
We'll be keeping you tuned as this is very much a ongoing research, but I'm glad that there's interest.
Thanks, Hélène and Amolo. I mean, what I'm hearing in summary is that we have the distribution of wealth creation to the poorest of the poor through these social commerce opportunities, and plenty opportunity for us to lean in and to support it. Thank you both for your time. What a fascinating conversation. And I'm now hooked on a new topic. So thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.